and welcome to episode number 98 of The Pitcher or the Hitter, the podcast by the M-SABR Dynasty League for the M-SABR Dynasty League. I am Cam.
I'm Sahil.
And a lot to talk about this week, but let's get started with a very important update, and that is that I won my first round ping pong game in the ping pong tournament. I went into the office on Thursday of this past week. This was yesterday at the time of recording. I won very handily against a guy who wasn't particularly good. So now I'm going to have to go back into the office some other day to play my second game, and hopefully I'll do just as well.
That's the most random tangent you've ever gone on last week. And it's funny because I feel like I'm usually the one driving the tangents, but all of a sudden I look up, you're just starting talking about ping pong, and I'm like, all right, we're going with it. But I'm very glad to hear that you won your game. I can't wait to hear future updates. I feel like we have to have a ping pong podcast.
We
The
do a
Pongcast,
PPP.
you would. Yeah, the PPP.
Yeah, the
Welcome to
ping
an
or the
episode of
pong.
welcome to another episode of Ping or to Pong. You
Ping
think,
pong dynasty league. Now imagine if we had a fantasy league of professional ping pongers.
dude, that'd be really cool. I mean, hey, there's fantasy darts, there's fantasy everything, man.
We could do some fantasy darts
We should do fantasy darts. Why don't we do fantasy darts? I'm sure
because
Sully
Sully's the only
do
one who knows
fantasy darts.
darts.
That is true. Hey, I joined a fantasy hockey league, and I don't know anything about hockey. You know, we all learn about darts.
Yeah, we could become dartists.
Dartist.
But yeah, let's. So that's the ping pong update. I guess I think I started talking about going into the office or something, and that's how we got on that tangent. But yeah, a lot of non-ping pong things to talk about as well. And let's start out with we have some trades.
Yeah.
But let's not go in chronological order this time. Let's start out with the big one, the blockbuster made between the two of us earlier today at the time of recording. That is, of course, the Adley for Contreras plus deal. Biggest deal we've made between the two of us in the podcast here, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and so it's funny. Cam and I, a week ago, I chatted Cam around this time, and I was like, over under 1.5 trades that you and I make this offseason, and we both said under. And we have made 2 trades this week. And we were also talking on this podcast last week, I believe, about how you and I have not really made a significant trade in quite some time. Like, it's been a hot sec since we made one that like really was big and not just a couple minor pieces moving between each team. And boy, we proved that wrong this week.
Oh, absolutely. And let's read the terms and conditions of this deal, shall we?
We should.
His trade. Big League Yellow Champs has agreed to trade Wilson Contreras, Pete Crow Armstrong, Harry Ford, Ruth Vick and Nick's 2024 first, and Daniel and Matt's 2026 first to me for Adley Rutschman.
Yes.
So classic 5-for-1 swap.
Yep. My favorite type of swap. Which one of us wants to start?
I can start since I imagine my spiel will be shorter.
Yes, that's probably true. That's a safe assumption. Go for it.
Yeah. So I can, there's a lot to unpack here. Adley Rutschman was my first round pick in the 2020 prospect draft. I tanked at the entire second half of the year so hard, specifically to get him, that we had to change our tanking rules.
Yeah.
Because of how badly I wanted to get Adley. How badly Rutschman I wanted him.
That's great.
I took him, I wrote him through my minors. He debuted this year for my team. He was great. And then we kind of talked a little bit. You were at various points of the season trying to see what it would take to get Adley. And I wanted a lot of pieces. I wanted Contreras. And then at certain points, I wanted a pitcher. At a certain point, that kind of became impossible. And then you pitched this offer to me out of the blue. And then I think we negotiated a tiny bit, but it really didn't take a lot. And how I view this deal in essence is I think over the next 2 years, the value between Adley and Contreras will be very similar. And it was very similar this year as well. And they both had a very similar amount of plate appearances since they both had injuries this year. So it's not a case of Adley just having less quantity and therefore not having time to catch up. But yeah, I thought the value is going to be similar in the short term in the next couple of years. And then after that, the gap will widen. But also after that, my guys will start to debut. And I think that, in my opinion, the quantity of those guys, I think of them as 4 first-round picks. Harry Ford is mashing the ball. He's when he debuts in a couple of years, he could slip right into that starting catching role from Wilson Contreras if he sticks at catcher, which I'm seeing conflicting reports about. And then PCA has crushed the minors, but people aren't sure if his bat's going to carry over to the majors. We'll see about that. But either way, I think they more than make up the long-term lost value for a catcher such as Adley. And I felt comfortable making that sacrifice. It's a very weird deal in the sense that I'm getting both the short term and the long term. It's very weird, a weird balance. But I felt like there was just so much value there, I couldn't pass it up. I compared this to in the chat. Imagine it's 2010, the 2010 offseason, and I'm trading you Buster Posey for Victor Martinez, Desmond Jennings, Devin Mesoraco, Anthony Rendon, and Chris Bryant. And sure, Buster Posey's a Hall of Famer, but Victor Martinez is kind of in the what Wilson Contreras was. Phenomenal catcher for the past few years. He had 1 or 2 more good years in his bat, maybe a little bit more than that. And then the prospects, Jennings was an outfield prospect ranked 20 or so at the time. He was a good player, didn't pan out to the best of his ability. Mesoraco hit amazingly while he was healthy. He was like a 60, 70 ranked catching prospect, but flamed out due to injuries. So he, in the Harry Ford role, didn't pan out. And then I just kind of picked 2 high draft picks for the following years who did end up, and those guys did end up panning out. Rendon was like the 6th overall pick, which is roughly where Ruthvik's pick is going to be in the draft of the following year. And then Chris Bryant was the 2nd overall pick in the draft 3 years down the line, which is where Daniel and Matt's pick is roughly going to be. And I don't know. I think even though Buster Posey's a Hall of Famer, I think I would win that deal. It's tough, though. It's tough to give up a guy like Adley who seems so surefire. Even though he hasn't been hitting the ball particularly hard this year, Wilson Contreras actually does have a better StatCast page than him right now. But I'm not worried about Adley in the long term. I'm not going to say bad things about him because I think he's a great player. I just think that this was a value that made sense for me in both the near term and the long term.
I think it's a very fair analysis. I'll speak about this trade from my perspective. Maybe I'm drinking a little bit of the orange Kool-Aid here, but I think you potentially traded me a future Hall of Fame catcher. I think that Adley is by far and away the #1 dynasty catcher. I have watched a lot of Adley this summer while studying for the bar. That was my break, watching Oriole games. I've just come away really impressed. I think he is the full package. The team looked different when he was playing compared to when it was Robinson, Trinos, and Anthony Bemboom at the beginning of the year. And I'm just completely sold on Adley being the #1 catcher in fantasy for the next 10 years. I mean, there's so many, like, I'm not gonna, I can sit here and go through a bunch of impressive stats about Adley and I'm not gonna do that. I think he is a very special talent. And if there's one thing that I've consistently done in this league, it's been that I've been willing to pay a premium for guys who I believe are elite, game-changing fantasy talents. I mean, you saw the price I gave up for Trey Turner a few months ago. You saw the price that I gave up now for Adley, for Mookie Betts, for some of the starters I've acquired: Brandon Woodruff, Max Fried, Julio Urias, Aaron Nola. You know, those weren't cheap to go get those guys, but um, those are talents that I don't feel like come available too often. And when they do, Tatis is another great example about this. I feel like this is just echoing the comments I made when Zane and I came on to talk about that. Tatis deals is like, you don't mess this opportunity up. Go and get the player and worry about the consequences later. So I'm very happy from that perspective. Now, in terms of what I gave up, I will concede that, like, yes, this is not an insignificant package I gave up. You know, Wilson Contreras is a very good player. You know, he's a very good hitter. Like you said, the Statcast page is elite. I do worry that he's about to be a 30-year-old catcher. And I do worry that while he might be somewhere next year with a better lineup context, I do worry that he will be hitting lower in the lineup wherever he goes. He's been batting second for the Cubs this year. And also, I wonder if he DHs less. Like, the Cubs pretty much had him DHing every day he wasn't catching. Now, I don't think either of those are going to affect his value too much, but that's something I was kind of keeping in mind. I felt like I was holding a depreciating asset in Contreras. So while I think he would have a couple more good years, you know, I didn't want to be holding on to a catcher again into his 30s for too much longer. With respect to
I think it's also fair to say, though, that Adley, once the Orioles kind of improve as a team and develop over the next couple of years, he'll be DHing less because they'll have someone better.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, it depends, right? Like, they might really just want to get Adley's bat in the lineup in any way they can. I mean, the way Adley was hitting this year, Adley since like June 10th has like a 152 WRC plus this year. Like, you're gonna want to keep that bat in the lineup somehow. And maybe if not a DH, maybe they're playing him at first base. He played some of that in the minors and in college. Ryan Mountcastle's not really tearing it up. I think he had an OBP below 300 this year. As well as the Orioles, for all the infield prospects they have, they don't really have anybody who's like a good first base prospect. So, you know, that's certainly possible as well. But you know, turning to the prospects I gave up, right? Like, I really like PCA. PCA's whole thing is he's always been a little bit of a better defensive prospect than a hitting prospect. I wasn't super impressed with the numbers when he jumped up to high A this year. I mean, I know he's a 20-year-old in high A. And I know that the numbers got better over the course of the season, but the fact he was only walking at a 5% clip worried me a little bit, and the strikeout rate went up. Could argue that I sold him at his highest point right now, but I still think the talent is immense and the upside is huge. I just wonder if he's going to be a better real life player than a fantasy player when it's all said and done. Although I'm still high on him, and I know a lot of people in the fantasy community are. Giving up Harry Ford was really tough. I love Harry Ford. You Cam of all people know how much I was talking about Harry Ford before the draft, and I traded up with you last year to get the 12th overall pick to be able to take Harry Ford. He's having a great season this year in Seattle. He's in low A ball. Age of 19, had a good year, but again, with PCA and Ford, they're both in A ball. There's still a lot that can happen. Yes, they might develop and become these elite talents in the majors, but there's still a lot of questions. We don't know what's going to happen. As for the picks, I mean, I think Ruth picks 2024 first. I told you off the air after I acquired the pick, I think there's a 50-50 shot that pick is a lottery pick.
Lottery pick?
Yeah. I'm still all right with giving up the pick. I mean, realistically, by the time that prospect is able to contribute, it might be 2027, 2028 in the majors if they make it to the majors, right? And I think my window at that point, I think my window right now is wider open than it will be in 2028. I don't want to speculate on what my team is going to look like in 6 years, but that doesn't bother me as much. And ditto with the 2026 pick, right? Like realistically, that pick's not going to contribute until like 2030. And again, we'll see what happens then. And it is Daniel and Matt's pick. I don't know what their team's going to look like in 4 years, but it's certainly possible that that is also a lottery pick. So that's definitely something I've, baked into the consideration here. But, like I said, to get an elite talent like Adley that I am very confident in, that I have had my eyes on a lot, that I, really just feel like is a really safe prospect. I mean, he was a number one prospect in baseball for a reason. Like I am very on board with him, and I am very excited to have him on my roster. It's fun. I will say too. I talked a couple of weeks ago about the finals tax, and I think there's a little bit of a tax when you go and acquire a young player from your favorite team like that, where you are willing to maybe give up that little extra to go and get them. And I can't say I would have paid the same for Adley that, or I paid more for Adley than I would have paid for somebody else in a comparable position, but on a different team. But it's fun. We started this league in 2018, right when the Orioles were, starting to tear down that really good team from 2012 to 2016. And, I've had Trey Mancini at different points, and I had a couple more Orioles at the beginning, but quickly traded or got rid of a lot of them. Gosman and Bundy come to mind. Remember when I owned Chance Cisco? It's fun to have some Orioles players now, Mullins and Rutschman, probably the Orioles number 1 and number 2 hitters this year on a team that's finally starting to win. And it's going to be fun to watch them over the next few years, not only in person, but or on my TV, but also on my fantasy team. So, we played a league for fun, right? Obviously, we're very competitive. We want to win, but at its core, we all play this league because it's fun, and it's extra fun for me to be able to watch Adley and also know that he's contributing to my fantasy team. So, if at the end of the day, maybe you extract more value of this, if Adley still turns out to be this awesome player that I know he can be, then I'll be very happy with this. I will say one more thing too, because I thought this was an interesting point. In the chat after you and I announced this trade, there were very mixed reactions, which I like, because I didn't think this is a slam dunk trade for either of us one way or another, right? I do think there's a lot of risk on both of our sides. There is certainly the risk that PCA and Ford don't pan out. There is certainly a risk that the picks you make bust. There's certainly a good chance that, hey, PCA or Ford or those picks end up being major league contributors, but they're not like either super great fantasy assets or they're just like nothing special. Maybe they're like in the like top 200 range of dynasty assets, which would probably make them a very good major league player that any team would love to have in real life, but does not necessarily make them like a guy in a dynasty league that you want to drop everything and make sure you have, right? But it could also work out for me too that maybe Adley doesn't end up being, this super, super, super elite guy. Maybe he's just a very, very solid hitter, or maybe he goes through a sophomore slump next year. Like, we just don't know, So there's definitely a lot of risk on both sides here. The last thing I'll say is
exactly. And to that point,
yeah,
it could go catastrophically wrong for either one of us.
Yes.
But I was saying this off air. It goes catastrophically wrong for you if one young player busts. It goes catastrophically wrong for me if 4 young players bust plus a established veteran busts.
Right. So you are spreading out the risk, but I think I have the highest upside player in the deal by far. And I also think that of the young assets, I'm excluding Contreras here because Contreras is a known asset at this point. Of the young assets, I think there is a substantial difference between the perceived value of what Adley could be and the floor that he has established now between him and the two prospects and the two picks. So that's where the difference is. They're different risk profiles. I'm not saying one is an inherently better risk than the other, but it is very risky for both of us, as well as also being something that we can both agree really, we think, works out for both of our teams.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do agree it does work out for both of us, and we had different reasons for making this trade.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, the different reactions. I know Eric and Ruthvik love the deal and Jake love the deal for you. I know that Sully and Andrew really like it for me. And we like it for ourselves. So that's really all that matters, and only time will tell who wins this deal. Maybe it's a win-win.
Yeah, I hope it's a win-win. And I feel like deals like this where there's split opinions are often some of the deals that end up being win-wins, not just a deal where you think one side's going to win or something like that. Another thing I'll add too, because one of the comments that I saw made, I think Sully was the one who raised this point, was, hey, I don't think that catchers are that valuable in fantasy. And I think that there is a difference between actual value or how do I phrase this? I think you have to look at comparative value and I think the difference between the number 1 catcher and the number 10 catcher is probably bigger than the difference between the number 1 at any other position and a number 10 at any other position. And I just use 10 as an arbitrary number. I think you could use this for a lot of different numbers here. There are a lot of bad catchers that can harm your team in certain categories. Even if you're, for example, accepting that, hey, I'm not going to get too many counting stats from this player, that's fine. They could hurt you in OBP, for example. So I think when you have the ability to go get an elite player at a position where there's not a lot of elite players, that makes them even more valuable. Scarcity makes an asset more valuable. There's a reason why, for those of you who play in seasonal leagues or, have just been reading about this, like, third base was super thin this year. And I know Jose Ramirez got pushed up a lot of draft boards and some other third basemen too, because fantasy players were like, hey, like the difference between, getting one of these top third basemen and then maybe getting one of these mid-tier third basemen is huge. And at that point, it's really hard to, kind of get that good, return on your value there. Whereas, hey, maybe we'll take an elite guy at a scarce position early on and then settle for a guy who's not quite at the top at another position, but they are much better than the mid-tier guy at that thinner position. So that's why I think, while you could argue that some of these catchers may not put up quite, it may not have as much of a potential to put up some of these stats because of the position they play to get some more off days. I do think that the comparative value between the elite catchers and other positions makes someone like Adley very valuable.
Yeah, I think so. I'll counter that just by saying an elite catcher. What is an elite catcher? He's a guy who's going to have 500 plate appearances and finish 25th in the player rater. And I think, just looking this season, the top catcher was Real Muto. He finished 33rd in the player rater. Looking back, 2021. I guess I can't look at the player rater. Wait, no, yes, I can. One moment, please. The top catcher was Sal Perez, and he finished 43rd in the player rater, and that was despite having way more plate appearances than most catchers normally do, than you could really ever reasonably expect from a catcher.
He also had a super low OBP, like that holds him back in our league.
But that's the thing. He was still the number 1 of catchers, though, and it's tough to find a catcher who's going to contribute in all categories anyway. So no one's going to be putting up Jose Ramirez numbers at the catcher position. And I think it's a fairly
I'm not saying
it's a
you need to do that though. I think if you get Adley and you get a third baseman who's not as good as, or third is a bad example because that's a thin position. If you get Adley and then get the say sixth or seventh best shortstop, I think you could be better off than getting like the second best shortstop, but like the eighth best catcher or ninth best catcher.
I guess it remains to be seen. I think it's very easy to find an adequate catcher. For example, Sean Murphy finished fourth in the player rater this year, and no one wanted him.
Okay, because people had who they perceived to be their catcher. You only need one catcher. Nobody's rostering more than one catcher unless they're Yuki.
Unless they're Yuki.
Right. And I don't know. I think we disagree on the comparative value of catchers to some degree. I think you recognize some of the value while also thinking that maybe it's weaker. Or I think we both have valid points. Let's put it that way.
I think you're right, and that's why there's so much disagreement in the chat.
I don't think there's a right answer, and I think that's the beauty of this league, though. So we all have different ways about approaching our teams and about approaching perceived value of players in different situations, and that's why we're able to make trades, and that's why things are so competitive and so much fun. So,
exactly, and it's not like I'm trading Adley to punt catcher. I traded Adley. I got Wilson Contreras, who is someone I've wanted for the last 3 years. I voted for him as catcher of the year each of the last 2 years, I think. Maybe not last year, but definitely after 2020. And he's someone I've wanted badly for a long time.
You expressed that to me after I traded for him last year. You thought that was a really good trade for me. I remember when I got him. And yeah, look, obviously, I love all the players you got because I own them. I drafted 2 of them in the first round. I gave up a first round pick for Contreras. I think you got a great package here. And I know how much you love Adley because you literally decided to tank for him. So
yeah, exactly. We had to change the rules because of how badly I wanted him.
Yeah, how badly you wanted Adley, right? So it's and I think that's what makes it interesting. Like the trades where I'll just be like, I'm so done with this guy, I'm gonna dump him. Like one of these deals we're gonna talk about a little later. Like those deals are like fun in the sense that like, hey, like I finally like accomplished this next step of getting rid of this guy and extracting value for him. But deals like this can be like are more interesting to me because it is like, hey, we are both gambling on like players that like we all like really like we like every single one of these players that was involved in this deal. And it's just like we're just kind of gambling and seeing like, are we valuing them right? Are we making the right deal here? That's way more interesting to me. So this one's gonna be a fun one to track.
Absolutely. And I think we've talked it to death. Do you have any final points here before we move on to some of the other trades?
I do have one more thing I want to say. Rest in peace to the big league Yellow Champs name. I know I have tried to change names in the past unsuccessfully, but like Adley is one of the few players that I feel like I could acquire and be like, I won't want to change my name back after getting him. And shout out to Zane coming up with Mountain Rushmore. That was so clever. I had not thought of that. And that is I feel like it's a good, strong name. I love it. And it has more at the end. So kind of plays with like the Baltimore too.
And the Dylan Moore.
Dylan Moore, fucking hell. Don't even get me started on that bullshit. If I wanted Dylan Moore, I would have spelled it Moore, which I could have. But no, I am very proud of Mount Rushmore. And there has to be a creative like what's the opposite of like a mountain that I can name my minor league team like Hill Rushmore or
Mount Ruchless.
Yes. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna announce that as soon as we finish recording. That's really
All right. You can do it right now. I bet there will be a good reaction that we can mention.
yes. You know what? I will do that right now. While I type that out, do we want to stick with our deals or do we want to move on to the non-cam deal I made this week?
Um, let's stick with our deal just because it's the first chronological deal of the week.
Yeah.
Um, and while you're typing that up, this was a fun one. You traded me Jake's 2023 second, a future 2023 to 2025 second that you acquire, and the next 2100 third you acquire, and a conditional pick to me for Hunter Renfroe. And there were a lot of conditions, but essentially the point of the conditions was that I have veto power over those 2023 to 2025 seconds. That's something I wanted from the start. I started with 3. You went down to 1, and I slowly over the course of an afternoon worked you up to 2.
You did.
But essentially, and I'm proud of my negotiations there. Essentially, I can veto if I don't like the future 2023 to 2025 second. Um, then I'll just say no, get a better one. And that's kind of, well, it's a little bit inspired by the whole 2100 saga
Yeah.
there, but
I knew
yeah,
after that happened that you would be more careful in how you worded these trades.
absolutely. And that's kind of what I was doing here. And if you don't get a 2020, or if you don't get a second to me that's acceptable by the day of the 2023 draft, I get the third rounder that I conveyed to you in the Sean Murphy condition. So there's a lot going on here, but essentially the gist of it is I traded Hunter Renfroe for a pair of seconds, and I get to decide what second I get, essentially.
Yeah, I'll speak from my perspective first. Hunter Renfroe is a player that I've really liked for a while. As you all may remember, I acquired him from Anthony earlier in the season. I believe in the middle of taking the bar. I remember making a comment about like Hunter Renfroe like giving me the power to like pass the bar. Because I had acquired him, I think like the day before or something like that. It's funny because the price has slowly been going up. I remember Jake initially wanted to give him away for a third. I told him once I clear roster space, I'd take him. He traded him to Anthony, who's like the price is now a second. I traded him to EBO. You got him from EBO for a second. And now the price has gone up to 2 seconds, but I do think his value's gone up, so it makes sense. Renfroe, one thing my team was missing last year early on was home runs and ribbies. I feel like I had done a very good job of obtaining like leadoff hitters. So like guys with like high run totals, like solid OBPs, like stuff like that. Like I think like Mookie Betts and Cedric Mullins, Trey Turner to some degree, maybe are not producing some of those home run numbers. Hunter Renfroe would have been third on my team in home runs, only behind Alonso and Mookie Betts. He did have an injury, a calf injury in the middle of the year. So he only played 125 games. He had 522 plate appearances on the season with 29 home runs. That's the same number of home runs that Jose Ramirez and Kyle Tucker had. Or actually, Kyle Tucker hit one more after the trade. But they did that in like significantly more plate appearances. Like Jose Ramirez had 163 more plate appearances. Renfroe was tied for 10th in home runs per at bat with Mookie Betts at 16.3. So if you're prorating these numbers out, he was about like a 35 home run, close to that, like or maybe 33-ish home runs, like 80-ish ribby bat this year. The one knock on him is that the OBP is not there, but he's had OBPs at 315. He's basically putting up identical stat lines the past 2 years in the triple slash lines. He's been like a 315-ish OBP guy. If he could just do that with 30 home runs, that's perfectly acceptable to me. I don't need him to be an everyday stud, but I think he's a very good complementary bat that will give me some power. And I thought he came at a very reasonable price.
Yeah, absolutely. Good deal for you. And let me talk about it from my perspective. There comes a certain point when there's a roster crunch and you get your players coming back from injury that you got to fit those guys in there. And I have to fit Chris Bryant back into my lineup. And I have to get Jared Kelenic in there because he's not hurt anymore, or he's not in the minors anymore. So essentially, you have to part ways with some of the guys that you acquire mid-season, so that you can free those slots up. And then when more injuries happen next year, you can reacquire some rentals again next year. But Hunter Renfroe was just a rental for me. This trade kind of came down to me choosing Brandon Nimmo over Hunter Renfroe. Nimmo with his OBP and his runs totals. He scored 102 runs this year, which was second on my team behind only Aaron Judge. And Renfroe, in the end, turned out to be a guy who was a big part of my team. He had some clutch home runs down the stretch. He seemed to hit a home run every Sunday for me. But what he was a guy who I got for a second. He appreciated in value. I got some great moments out of him, and I traded him for more than I got. More than I gave up for him. So that seems like a win on my end, regardless of how he does in the future. If I consider him a rental, and I think this is probably the peak of his value, but even if it's not, I won't lose sleep over it.
Yeah, exactly. And even though I paid more than you paid, I think you're right. His value has appreciated a little bit. He had a very good end of the season. And honestly, it still is like, if he totally busts next year and I cut him by June, I'm not gonna totally miss, the 24th overall pick and whatever other second I'll give to you. It'll be annoying, but like, it's not like it's a cheap gamble on my end as well. And one where you were able to extract value for a player where you didn't necessarily have the space for him. So I think another win-win on a smaller scale than the Adley trade. But so much fun these the negotiations, and I will say, like it was a new thing negotiating the number of vetoes somebody had over a pick. This is definitely something that has not been negotiated over before, so that was really cool.
Yeah, and I love these new little wrinkles in the league, and maybe this is a thing that happens in the future more with now that you last year started trading hypothetical picks which you don't have. Maybe this is a thing more teams will do, is bargain veto power for those picks to make sure it's one they want. I feel like it's the logical next step. Not to consider myself an astronaut or anything, but I've broken a new frontier here. But I love these new innovative trades. Every time an innovation comes, it's a good thing. I'll never forget the very first time a draft pick was traded, and people thought it was the wildest thing ever. And now you don't see any trades without a draft pick involved. When was the last trade with no draft picks? I guess it was Seiya Suzuki for Tyler Freeman. But before that, I guess there was only one other deadline deal without any draft picks, and that was the Anthony Santander deal. But almost every trade involves draft picks, and that was unfathomable when we began the league. Like, who would have wanted to trade for a draft pick,
Yeah.
And it was that looked like it was Eric who was the first one to trade for a draft pick. So he was the innovator there. Normally it's you, and this time it's me.
Yeah, well, I came up with the innovation in the first place that caused you to come up with this innovation. So
Exactly. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here.
Exactly. Yes, you are the Michigan State to my Michigan of innovations here. You are the son or the little brother of innovations. There
I
we
don't know if I'd call it that, but okay.
go. I'm calling it that. But yes. Anything else you'd like to say about this, or do we want to move on to the last deal?
Now let's move on to the final deal. This was another one of yours. All three trades this week were made by you. The last five trades have been made by you. Why don't you break it down?
Yeah, I traded Marte to EBO for Ruthvik's 2024 first. Um, Marte is an interesting one, and it's funny because I've been listening to a lot of podcasts that have come out already talking about the 2023 fantasy baseball season, and they're like, "Well, what do we do with Marte?" Marte had a very interesting season. He started out the season super cold in April, like very bad. Let's see, like I'll pull up these splits here because these splits are really just there's something. Um, so in April, he had a 146, 211, 256 slash line. So 467 OPS. He was great from May through July, 964 OPS, and 861 OPS, 937 OPS, and then he tanked. August 497 OPS, September 616 OPS, and like the power evaporated. So he started getting plagued by hamstring injuries later in the season, which has always been a problem with him. And you could argue like, hey, he was hurt, maybe he's going to bounce back and be fine. And sure, that could be the case. But he's only really popped off one season. That was 2019. He had the 389 OBP, 592 slug, 32 home runs, 92 ribbies, 36 doubles, 97 runs. Fantastic, right? He has not replicated those numbers since. In like 1,000 some plate appearances since that 32 home run season, he only has 28 home runs. He only played in 90 games in 21. He only played in 45 of 60 games in 20. So he's dealt with injuries in addition to dealing with them this year. And despite the hot 3 months, he still only finished with 12 home runs, 52 ribbies, and 68 runs. Like, I don't think we're going to get a return to 2019. And even those 2019 numbers, remember, that was the year with the rabbit ball. So I don't think he's getting back to that. Do I think he could be a 20 home run hitter again? Sure. Do I think he can get that OBP back up a bit? Like, sure. But I just don't see him between the injuries and maybe the fact that there's not as live of a ball that he's like gonna be this guy that I'm gonna miss. That's not to say he couldn't be a very good player, but a guy that I can miss. I got Ruthvik's 2024 first round pick with the expectation that that would be part of a larger package to go get a player at a position that I needed more. So that was the other thing with Cattell. When I did get Trey Turner, right? With Tatis coming back next year as well. Altuve, Tatis, Turner's at middle infield. I still have Correa and Muncy. Marte became expendable there. So and nobody really wanted Marte in the trade market. So I wanted to get an asset that would be more that would be more attractive to a potential trade partner. And as it went, I thought maybe that would be more to go out and get another starting pitcher. I didn't think that was going to be to go out and get Adley. This pretty much worked out the way I wanted it to. So I have no regrets. And then from EBO's perspective, I know Zane was like, he's only he's still in his 20s. He'll be 29 at the start of next year. And he's shown this upside before. They've had a ton of picks. It's a worthwhile gamble. And he had a 909 OPS as recent as last year. Like I'm not saying he couldn't still bounce back. But I'm not fully seeing the bounce back to an elite player that I'd miss. But I do think he's a worthwhile gamble for EBO.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if a player of his caliber is what you can get for a second or for a first rounder, then I feel very happy about acquiring that first rounder in the deal that I made subsequently.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Um, I will say the prices in this league are interesting right now because I feel like the hitters are going cheaper than the pitchers. Um,
Mm.
like
So
uh it's a good buyer's market for hitters and it's a great seller's market if you really want to go out and sell a pitcher. Because like I thought there were pitchers that were comparative value to tell. And like even giving up both of the first round picks wasn't going to be anywhere close. So we shall see. But
yeah, no, I know. I've reached out to a team about their starting pitchers, and it seems like even offering a star on that owner's team isn't really getting me close to some good pitchers. So it's definitely a market where hitting's a lot easier to come by.
yeah, I think so too. It's frustrating, but that's just the way it goes. But yeah,
Yeah, that essentially translates to Francisco Lindor's not getting me anywhere close to getting Shane Bieber.
seriously?
Yeah.
So yeah, one more thing I want to add about the Adley deal. The reason I thought of the package that I gave to Cam, it was twofold. One, Cam and I had discussed in the past different ways for me to get Adley. So he had initially talked, we had talked Contreras, PCA, and a starting pitcher. And I hadn't thought much about it because the pitcher he wanted was like Frieder Urias. I was like, that wasn't going to happen. But then we were talking Judge and Turner deals after, and it's funny. I think it was me talking to you that kind of prompted you to put Judge, like type formally into chat, like, hey, Judge is on the trade block. Because we kept talking about Judge's trade value. And then we were talking. Yeah, I was like, hey, what would you want for Judge? You mentioned, hey, elite shortstop. And I was like, I think I have the two best dynasty shortstops in Tatis and Turner. You asked if I give one up. I was like, well, hypothetically, if it was Turner, what else would you need? We talked PCA, and I was like, I don't know if you have any other prospects of mine that interest you. And you said Harry Ford. And I didn't think much about it because I remember kind of rejecting it. Like I wanted to keep Turner over Judge. I didn't think paying that prospect premium was worth it. But I remember driving home and I was thinking, if he likes these prospects, I wonder if there's someone else on his team I could get. And I was thinking of some of your starting pitchers at first, and then I was like, well, what about Adley? I was like, I want Adley. And that's why I decided to make the offer. So um I thought that was kind of an interesting tidbit here. You never know where something is going to lead you with like one trade offer that's going to take you somewhere else or a conversation that you've had. And I think some of the best trades that I have made are trades where I've just come up with the offer on a whim and the other team is like, yeah, I'd actually do this. So sometimes it doesn't go as I plan it in my head as like these are the moves I'm going to make this off season and like this is how I'm going to create the perfect team. It's just shit that happens on a whim and then you adjust from there. So I thought that was a fun tidbit I wanted to add.
Yeah, and about just yeah, connecting it to the fact that pitchers are hard to get. But yeah, it's an interesting trade market for sure, and I wonder if there's going to be any sort of overcorrection or any sort of changes by the end of the offseason or how different it's going to look next year. Because yeah, right now you just can't get a pitcher.
Well, I'll say two things to that. One, it's still very early in the offseason. I mean, we were still literally at game one of the wild card today at the time of recording, right? Like we were recording as the Padres and Mets were playing. Um, and there's still a lot of teams in this league who have not really switched their attention over to making baseball trades. So, like, you never know. Number one. I think number two, what hurts compared to previous years is that now more than ever, the top pitchers are already concentrated on the top teams with a couple of notable exceptions. But those notable exceptions are starting to realize, hey, like the teams that are winning have starting pitching. So we aren't going to give up these starting pitchers because while maybe we could get some value from them, like for them in the trade market, like we're not going to compete if we're just continuously trading a bunch of aces away. So I could definitely,
and I think that's objectively the smart move.
yeah, I think it's a smart move too. And I think a lot of teams have been the one type of trade that I know, at least for me, I have been consistently good at, and you've made a lot of these good trades too, is giving up a bunch of pieces to go and get an ace starting pitcher. Like I've had almost none of those trades have backfired on me. And I think teams are starting to notice that these trades are backfiring on them a little bit. And I wonder if that's going to shift how we think about trading pitching prospects too. If teams are going to start putting more emphasis in, hey, we're going to develop these pitching prospects rather than going out and paying a premium for the hitter, and then maybe that affects the pitching prospect trade market. Because honestly, like I've always been of the philosophy of I don't want to deal with pitching prospects, I'll trade them away. Whereas now maybe that has to change, and maybe you have to put more emphasis in acquiring pitching prospects and scouting them to see if there's some sort of sign that like, hey, like this player is more likely to stick as a quality starter.
Right. But yeah, on the other hand, how it's tough. There's really only been one pitching prospect who's gone straight from the draft to being an ace in a rotation, and that's Alek Manoah. I mean, Spencer Strider was a free agent pickup. Shane McClanahan, free agent pickup.
George
really,
Kirby, I guess, for Eric.
George Kirby, yeah, he's good. He's not one of the he's a good name. He's not one of like the elite young guys. I'd put him in like the second tier of those guys.
Yeah, that's fair, but like still, like I mean, I still think he's a very good. He had a 3.39 ERA this year in 130 innings, 2.99 FIP, a 9.21 K per nine, a 1.52 walk per nine. I'll put him in that first tier. Those are fantastic numbers, especially for a rookie.
No, that's fair.
Okay,
Certainly.
yeah. So, but even then, all right, that's still two guys, and we have now had 5 rookie drafts, and there have been a lot of pitchers that have been drafted. Look at last year's draft. Remember how high a lot of people were in Jack Leiter? Andrew drafted him number 2 overall. He did not have a good year this year. And there's a lot of other pitchers drafted here too. Sam Bachman, you drafted at 18, hasn't been the best. Gavin Williams has been solid, but so is Andrew Painter, but even Andrew Painter was traded. Connor Hoglund, Will Bednar, Frank Mazzucato, Michael McGreevy, Jordan Wicks haven't really done much of anything.
Excuse me. I think you mean Frank Mazzucato.
Frank Mazzucato, thank you. I don't do the voice. I was gonna wait for you to.
Hey.
But like even like Jackson Jobe, I'm trying to see his stats here. Like Jackson Jobe didn't have that great of a year in the minors. Like literally it was like Andrew Painter, and Andrew Painter had already been traded. Oh, and then Gavin Williams, right? So it's hard. Drafting pitching is hard. Go back to the year before. Max Meyer, Tommy John surgery. I was reading an article today that they wonder if he'll be just better coming out of the bullpen. And that's what a huge risk with a lot of these arms is. Asa Lacy looks like a bust. Emerson Hancock, I think some of the shine has come off of him. Mick Abel, solid, but he's getting overshadowed by Painter. I mean, Reed Detmers has been very up and down. Garrett Crochet is not even on the roster, and he's had TJ. Nick Bitsko's been hurt. Cade Cavalli, after coming on strong last year, hasn't been as sharp this year. Bryce Jarvis, I haven't heard about him recently, so probably nothing too special. Ditto with Cole Wilcox and Jared Kelly. So it's tough. It is not easy.
It is really not. Yeah, and I certainly haven't done a good job picking starting pitchers in the draft when I draft it's tricky. I mean, yeah, I took I took Sam Bachman over Gavin Williams because I thought he was my guy, and it turned out not to be correct, so far at least. And my only other real pitcher pick was Matt Allen, who didn't do much, and I took him 2 spots before George Kirby. So there's no one knows, you know, no one knows who's going to be the good pitching prospect, and who's going to be good in the majors. And that's why there's a lot of randomness, and you don't want to let go of a guy once you have him. Kyle Wright, for example. Kyle Wright broke out this year after being terrible for a while.
Well, that's the other thing too. We have a 50 inning pitching limit, right? And at some point, especially if you are a winning team, you have to make a decision there and then and just be like, hey, is this someone I am willing to commit to and I'm going to go through the ups and downs with a roster spot, not knowing if he's actually going to pan out, or maybe he pans out, but he's more like a streamer, which might be good in real life for a major league team, but not a good, elite fantasy arm or anything. Or am I just going to let him, go to somebody else's team and hope it doesn't backfire? And a lot of these times, these pitchers too might start in like the bullpen, and they'll use up their innings there. So then, they're not getting saves or holds. Maybe they're long men, and maybe you don't know what they're going to look like in a rotation. And then you have to make the decision based off of that. It is so hard. It's not like with the position player. With a position player, you at least have some sort of idea. They're getting at bats, whatever, even if they're not starting every single day. Like an at bat is an at bat, right? It's a very different when you're pitching in the rotation versus pitching in the bullpen. And even with the 50 inning limit, like that might be like 10 starts, 140, I think, is the plate appearance limit. That still is probably like 35-ish games, if you're getting four at bats a game.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of bumping that up to 75. I don't know about you.
I would too. That's a rule change we should propose. I would like that. I think that would benefit rebuilding teams as well because it gives them more roster flexibility.
Exactly. And I think it's tough to tell if a starting pitcher is good. And I have a thing in my head I call the Suarez line, named after Jose Suarez, where if a pitcher is better than Jose Suarez, then a young pitcher will stick on your roster, and they'll be in your they're a guy to count on going forward. If they're worse than Jose Suarez, then they're just going to be a waiver guy who's an occasional streamer. But Jose Suarez he's somewhere in the middle. He's put together two reasonably good seasons now. He's 24. And yet he's kind of an in-between guy who's passed around all the time. And every team that picks him up seems to think, hey, this is a guy who's pitching well enough and he can maybe stick on my roster. And then after a couple weeks, they cut him. And this happens every time. It's happened to me. It's happened to Ruth Vick. I know it's happened to a couple other teams.
It's happened to me before, but now I'm the one holding the Jose Suarez potato at the moment.
Yeah, and he's kind of he's the line at the moment. He's kind of halfway between,
I like that. That's fun.
The Suarez line. I hope that's something that becomes an official term.
I hope it does. Hey, I'm trying to start a new term with Aaron Bummer, calling everything an Aaron Bummer that is a bummer.
Yeah, well, I'll try and make Aaron Bummer happen if you try and help make the Suarez line happen.
Oh, I will absolutely try and make the Suarez line happen, especially because I own Jose Suarez now. He's my boy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a flattering thing to call him. Not an unflattering. It's by definition neither flattering nor unflattering. But
yeah. I mean, I think people understand who Jose Suarez is and what they're getting into if they acquire him. So I'm not. I think there's only so much convincing I could do one way or another.
That is true. But yeah, so we managed to talk a lot about in a week where we had 3 trades and nothing else to mention. Is there anything else we have here?
No, I don't think there's anything else. There's no reaction to me changing my minor league name. I'm a little disappointed about that. But it is
what that is? That's an Aaron Bummer.
That is an Aaron Bummer. Thank you. Um, no, I think that's it. Um, I'm not surprised we talked for so long because we were involved in all of these trades, or you weren't involved in one of them, but I was involved in them. Um, and we do have our meetings on Wednesday, where we'll discuss these rule changes, hopefully discuss some trades. And I'll be interested to see if that kind of starts and kicks off maybe some more off-season moves for teams that aren't me and you. Or what happens there. But either way, I'm looking forward to this. This has already been a crazy start to the off-season, and it should be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Gonna be a great off season for sure. Our fifth off season going into our sixth season. But yeah, until next time, we have a very special podcast next week. I can't wait for that. And we'll see you then.
Yep, see you then.
Look and be dangerous. How badly do you want me? How badly do you want my